outputs in between also.
To all the faculty and all my colleagues. So I'm I'm Vishnuvardhan, third year resident under Dr. P.R. Moody sir and Dr. A.G. Shah sir of NSD Surgical Unit. So today I'm going to discuss about the laparoscopic management of achalasia cardia. Sir, to begin with the definition, sir, achalasia is a Greek term that means it does not relax. It is a rare primary motility disorder of the esophagus characterized by the absence of esophageal peristalsis and incomplete relaxation of a frequently hypertensive lower esophageal sphincter in response to swallowing. Sir, earlier it was used as a misnomer for a disease wherein the lower esophageal sphincter was supposed to be in spasm, but usually it's not in spasm, but it just fails to relax. Sir, in brief history about the disease itself, for nearly 250 years, achalasia cardia was known as cardiospasm. Because of the gasping chest pain and pain in the upper part of the abdomen, people used to believe that it is a cardiac pain. And 300 years ago, Sir Thomas Willis described a patient suffering from dysphagia, for which he deduced the cause to be an obstruction in the cardia of the stomach. In 1672, he treated the patient by dilatation of the esophagus using a sponge attached to a long whalebone, thus recording the first successful treatment of this disease. And sir, in 1927, Sir Arthur Hurst coined the term achalasia after demonstrating the failure of the lower esophageal sphincter to relax normally. Sir, anatomy of the lower esophageal sphincter and gastroesophageal junction. The lower esophageal junction, lower esophageal sphincter passes through the both thrusts of the diaphragm to join the gastroesophageal junction. So the gastroesophageal junction is identified by the angle transitional zone between the esophageal mucosa and the gastric mucosa, which is called as a Z line. It's a zigzag line at the junction of the esophagus and gastric mucosa. So the gastroesophageal junction and is at present at the upper part of the stomach and at the lower distal end of the esophagus. So usually the lower esophageal sphincter is usually located 2 to 3 centimeters below the Z line. And sir, surrounding the lower esophageal sphincter, it is covered by the phrenicoesophageal ligaments, the ascending and the descending limb of the both crura of the esophagus, of the diaphragm. There is a subhiatal fat which is located on the both sides. So the circular muscle fibers of the inner layer of the muscle layer of the esophagus, and there is an outer longitudinal layer. Sir, it is the inner esophageal inner lower esophageal sphincter, and there is an external lower esophageal sphincter which is the crura of the diaphragm, which acts as an external lower esophageal sphincter. Sir, if you go into the microanatomy, the human esophagus has a mucous membrane containing a tough stratified squamous epithelium without keratin, a smooth lamina propria, and a muscularis mucosa. The submucosa also contains submucosal plexus, a network of nerve cells that is part of the enteric nervous system. The muscular layer of the esophagus has two types of muscles. The upper third of the esophagus contains striated, the lower third contains smooth, and the middle contains a mixture of the both muscles. The muscles are arranged in two layers, one in which the muscle fibers run longitudinal, the longitudinal muscles, and the one in which the fibers encircle the esophagus. These are separated by the myenteric plexus or the Auerbach's plexus, a tangled network of nerve fibers involved in the secretion of mucus and in peristalsis of smooth muscles of the esophagus. Sir, in blood supply, sir, the blood supply to the esophagus and the lower esophageal sphincter is given by the ascending branches of the left gastric artery, and venous drainage is by the tributaries of the coronary vein which join to the portal venous system. Sir, the main topic of discussion today is the nerve supply of the lower esophageal sphincter, for which the primary etiology of achalasia cardia is associated with. The esophageal motor innervation is by the vagus nerve. It contains both Auerbach's and Meissner's plexus. The striated muscles of the proximal esophagus are directly innervated by the somatic efferent cholinergic fibers of the vagus nerve originating from the nucleus ambiguous. These are the efferent fibers, sir, of the upper esophagus of the striated muscle. These are from the nucleus ambiguous. And these are the lower esophageal sphincter smooth muscles, which has the both inhibitory neurons and the excitatory neurons. The inhibitory neurons has acetylcholine receptors which secrete nitric oxide, which cause the relaxation of the smooth muscle. Sir, in the preganglionic vagus fibers release acetylcholine which to the both postganglionic neurons in the myenteric plexus, the excitatory cholinergic and the inhibitory nitrinergic neurons. Sir, in primary etiology, it is considered idiopathic there are few theories which support the etiology of the achalasia cardia, sir. Primary in human leukocyte antigen DQW1, it has been shown to be associated with achalasia, which causes antibodies to the myendric nerve plexuses, which is an autoimmune syndrome. And there is T-cell evaluation in T-cell evaluation of patients with achalasia. It has shown that there is a reactivity to herpes simplex virus 1. Latent herpes simplex virus reactivation can cause prolonged activation of the achalasia cardia in patients who are susceptible to herpes simplex. So causes of secondary achalasia, it is Chagas disease caused by Trypanosoma cruzi, a parasite which gets in the esophageal muscles and causes denervation of the myendric plexuses. And in malignancy, it is a similar picture to achalasia, which is also termed as pseudoachalasia due to narrowing of the lower esophageal sphincter and the distal esophagus. In amyloidosis, there is deposition of amyloid material in the muscle fibers and the submucosal plexus, causing fibrosis and thinning of the distal esophagus. Similarly, in sarcoidosis and neurofibromatosis, where the neurofibromatas are formed in the myendric plexuses, which cause luminal occlusion of the distal esophagus and the lower esophageal sphincter. So, similarly, in multiple endocrine neoplasia and juvenile Sjogren's syndrome. Sir, while coming to pathogenesis, achalasia results from the degeneration of the neurons in the esophageal wall, and the histological examination reveals there are decreased numbers of the neurons in the myendric plexuses. The ganglion cells that remain often are surrounded by lymphocytes and less prominently by eosinophils. This inflammatory degeneration preferentially involves the nitric acid producing inhibitory neurons. Loss of inhibitory innervation in the LES causes the basal sphincter pressure to rise. This is an image showing the normal myendric neurons in the lower esophageal sphincter, where both cholinergic and nitrinergic neurons are present. Here there is a manometrical image of the same thing, sir. After swallowing, there is a rise in peristaltic wave, and there is a simultaneous, as the peristaltic wave reaches the lower esophageal sphincter, there is a fall in the lower esophageal sphincter base pressure. In achalasia with loss of inhibitory neurons, there is a peristaltic wave riding down the esophagus, and there is no significant loss of the loss or relaxation in the lower esophageal sphincter pressure. In achalasia with loss of all neurons, that is both inhibitory and nitrinergic, cholinergic and nitrinergic neurons, there is complete aperistalsis and there is no decrease in the basal LES pressure. So clinically, the patient will manifest with dysphagia, solids greater than liquids. There is history of mild weight loss. Patient has complaints of chest pain, which is identical to the heartburn, and there is symptoms of regurgitation of food, which patient has taken prior days. And sir, in further management, sir, in diagnostic modalities, patients with suspected achalasia, there are 3 important tools in diagnosing the achalasia cardia. One is barium swallow. The other modality is endoscopic imaging. The other is manometry, which can be conventional, or esophageal topography along with high resolution manometry. So these are the barium swallow images showing bird beak appearance of the esophageal barium swallows. In manometric examination, nowadays it is required for confirmation of achalasia cardia in virtually all cases. The 3 characteristic manometric features of achalasia are elevated resting lower esophageal pressures, which is above 45 millimeters of mercury, and incomplete lower esophageal sphincter relaxation, aperistaltis present in the esophagus, and there is another criteria which shows the simultaneous esophageal contractions having amplitudes of greater than 60 millimeters of mercury, a condition known as vigorous achalasia. Sir, based upon high resolution manometry, the achalasia cardia has been graded into 3 classifications of the Chicago classification, which has been recently modified in 2009, and currently it is in version 3.0. The esophageal pressure topography has allowed for the differentiation of achalasia into 3 subtypes or variants. In type 1, sir, there is achalasia associated with absence of peristalsis and minimal esophageal body preservation with high integrated relaxation pressure, which is greater than 15 mm. In type 2, 15 mm of mercury. In type 2, the achalasia is associated with pan-esophageal preservation of greater than 30 millimeters of mercury and related to a compression effect with high integrated relaxation pressure, which is again greater than 15 mm of mercury. In type 3, sir, there is abnormal contractility, which is spastic in nature, of 2 or more contractions with high integrated relaxation pressure.
Vishnu, can I ask you a question? What is the relevance of this type as far as the prognosis is concerned and the treatment is concerned?
Sir, prognosis wise, sir, type 1 to 3 are more prone for better outcomes following myotomy, where the
type 1 to 3. Tell me again. Type 1 or type 2 or type 3?
Type 1 and type 2 have better outcomes, sir. While as type 3, there is a poorer outcome, and whereas the patient with sigmoid esophagus or mega esophagus.
No, we're not talking of that. We're talking of, this is described by a person called Pandolfino. This is also called a Pandolfino's Chicago classification. You're absolutely right. Type 3 has the highest recurrence rate. Is there anything about the treatment that we should be guided by the type of achalasia? Which treatment is best for which kind?
For type 1 and type 2, if patient has not undergone any prior medications, like patient is not resolving on pharmacotherapy, or patient has gone to prior botulinum injections, we can go for myotomy, and the results of type 1 and type 2 patients is better when the myotomy outcome is better in type 1 and type 2. Sir.
1 minute, just stop. Are you suggesting to me that the primary treatment is pharmacotherapy and botulinum toxin?
Patients who have undergone prior treatments of pharmacotherapy and...
No. Is there any role for pharmacotherapy in treatment of achalasia?
Patients who are not fit for surgery or patients who are greater than 60.
Vishnu, listen to his question. Sir is specifically asking, is there any line of medical management? No, except for those moribund patients in which you are not able to do anything.
Correct.
So the first line of treatment nowadays would be a laparoscopic procedure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. What about you? You are quite right. Type 1, type 2 do well with myotomy. What about balloon dilatation, Botox, and POEM? Which is suited for what?
Type 1, sir, we can go for balloon dilatation, sir.
Are you sure? No, it's the other way around. I think your presentation so far was very good, which is why I'm asking you these specific questions.
No, but that is why we have you, sir, here.
Yes, sir. The only clear thing we know from the Pandolfino classification is the pan pressurized esophagus, that is type 3. There is a recent paper from Dr. Nagesha Reddy's group in Journal of Neurogastroenterology saying that POEM gives better results for type 3 compared to myotomy. That is the only data that we currently have. In type 1, type 2 has the best prognosis. In type 2, you do anything. You do balloon dilatation, you do POEM, you do myotomy, all will have good results. In type 1, myotomy is the treatment of choice along with POEM. Carry on.
These are the high resolution manometry images of
Okay, you tell me what you're seeing in images. You're showing me pretty blue, green, red colors, but what is the meaning? Tell me on the screen what you're seeing.
Sir, this is on the y-axis, sir, this is the length of the esophagus, and on x-axis there is time in seconds, sir. And sir, after taking a basal relaxation pressure, we give the patients swallows, 10 swallows in the supine position and followed by 5 swallows in the high resolution.
How are they given? What do you give for swallowing?
Sir, for swallowing, we can give non-viscous material like liquids, sir. Water.
Okay. So you put in your catheter, manometry catheter. How is it placed?
So the manometry catheter is placed transnasally, which is extending up to 36. The high resolution manometry catheter has 36 pressure sensitive points, which are placed 1 centimeter apart, sir.
After the way you should answer an exam is, this is a water perfused 16 channel high resolution picture. These 3 things will tell the examiner that you already know. Don't ask me silly questions. But if you don't tell me, then the people like me are going to try and pull your leg by asking you foolish questions. So tell me these, what do the colors indicate? The red, yellow, green, blue?
The blue color indicates that the pressure is between 0 and 10, sir, which increases gradually from green and then to yellow and then to red and then to purple. The gradual increase
black. Yes. Black is when the pressures are very high. Okay. What is the normal LES pressure?
Normal resting LES pressure is 30 mm of mercury.
30?
15 to between 15 mm of mercury, sir. 10 to 15 mm of mercury.
12 to 15 millimeters of mercury. Anything below 10 is called hypotensive LES. Okay. Yeah. Carry on. Very good.
Type 1, there is aperistaltic segment. This is the upper esophageal sphincter, sir, where there is pressurization, followed by aperistaltic segment of the esophagus, and then the lower esophageal sphincter, there is elevated LES pressure, sir. Followed by...
You told me about the LES. Can you also have problems at the upper esophageal sphincter, similar to achalasia? there is a condition called cricopharyngeal achalasia, which only affects the upper esophageal sphincter. This is related to another condition called Zenker's diverticulum. Have you heard of Zenker's? This is basically a pulsion diverticulum that comes into cricopharynx because of cricopharyngeal achalasia. Carry on. You're doing well.
Type 2, there is a continuous peristaltic segment with pan-esophageal pressurization, and there is increased pressurization of the lower esophageal sphincters. And in type 3, sir, there is spastic pressurization pattern seen extending from the upper esophagus to the lower esophagus with increased lower esophageal sphincter pressure. Sir.
Yeah, carry on.
So these are the endoscopic images of a patient with achalasia cardia, sir. The first image is showing air bubbles within the esophagus, which shows that there is logging of fluid along with air, showing a dilated esophagus, which is a common sign seen in patients with achalasia cardia. Along with logging of fluid in the lower esophageal sphincter due to closure of the lower esophageal sphincter, there is logging of fluids, and associated with food particles logging, which may be regurgitated back from the prior day's food. And sir, this is the puckering of the lower esophageal sphincter, which might pop out on applying pressure with a pop sound.
Right. So it is typically the endoscopy describes as a give. When you go from the esophagus to stomach, you have a give because of loss of resistance. The other thing you're interested to see is there any associated fungal infections? Because of long-standing stasis, you often get esophageal candidiasis. If there is candidiasis, this must be treated prior to doing the myotomy. Carry on.
Sir, coming to management options, sir. Current treatment options in achalasia are aimed at reducing the hypotonicity of the lower esophageal sphincter by pharmacological, endoscopic, or surgical means. No intervention significantly affects esophageal peristalsis, and despite therapeutic interventions, the lower esophageal sphincter hypotonicity returns over time, requiring repeat interventions. The goals in treating achalasia nowadays are to relieve patient symptoms and improve the esophageal emptying and prevent further dilatation of the esophagus. Sir, brief discussion about other treatments. The pharmacological intervention. The goal of the pharmacotherapy for achalasia is the relief of the functional obstruction of the lower esophagus by relaxation of the lower esophageal sphincter. Botulinum toxin, a potent neurotoxin, inhibits the release.
Do? In pharmacotherapy, what do you do?
Sir, calcium channel blockers will be given to the patient, sir, which causes relaxation of the lower esophageal sphincter, and there will be transient relaxation of the lower esophageal sphincter while the patient is on pharmacotherapy, which causes relief in the symptoms for the time being.
How effective is pharmacotherapy and how long does the effect last? Vishnu?
Yes, sir.
How effective is nifedipine? Nifedipine is a drug that is used, and how long does the effect last?
It lasts for 2 to 4 hours after the injection of the...
So how long can you give it? 3 months, 6 months, 5 years? As sir said, there is no role for pharmacotherapy in the modern treatment of achalasia. It is only given as a bridging procedure till the patient undergoes a definitive treatment, or in patients who are unfit or unwilling for endoscopy or laparoscopy. That is the only indication of pharmacotherapy. Carry on.
So Vishnu, when you don't know, just say so we can go further. Okay? Because I think something wrong with your internet, it looks like. You are from COVID ward, speaking from COVID ward?
No, sir. No, sir.
I think he is also in COVID duty. That's the problem. Okay, carry on.
Followed by botulinum toxin. It is a potent neurotoxin which inhibits the release of acetylcholine at presynaptic terminals of motor neurons. And sir, there is endoscopic dilatation, which is currently...
One second. How is Botox given?
Sir,
Since
Botox
you mentioned it, how
yes,
is it
sir,
given and
Botox
how effective is it?
Sir, endoscopically, Botox syringe is inserted into the esophagus, sir, and then it is given at the lower esophageal the lower esophageal sphincter. It is injected into the lower esophageal sphincter.
Right. And how much do you give?
And what is the cost?
What is the cost? Yeah, that's a relevant question. And which patients will use Botox? Do you know? If you don't know, just say don't know. Carry on. Now, what is it?
I don't know.
So Botox, you will give 500 units at 2 quadrants by endoscopic injection. It is to be given just submucosally into the upper part of the muscle. The problem with Botox is it is a very short acting action, just for a few weeks to months. The second is once you give Botox, it induces a lot of submucous fibrosis. So subsequent surgery becomes more difficult. Okay, carry on.
So is it used commonly, sir?
Botox used to be used commonly in Mumbai until about 2017, but most endoscopists have given it up because of the very fibrosis that it causes and the very short-term action. Also, the cost of that Botox injection itself is 30,000. So the total procedure cost comes to 35-40,000, and the effect is very transient. It was originally advocated by AGA with a type B recommendation for elderly people who can't be given sedation for dilatation. But now Botox has little or no role. Go on, Vishnu.
Endoscopic dilatation is currently considered the most effective non-surgical treatment for achalasia. But patients who are willing for undergoing myotomy, endoscopic dilatation is considered not a good choice because it causes fibrosis of the submucosal fibrosis, which can cause perforations or difficulty in performing a myotomy.
So how do you do endoscopic dilatation?
Sir, Rigiflex is the endoscopic dilatation instrument, sir, which is passed through which is a 3 centimeter, 4 centimeter.
Which is better. See, routinely we, in our setup, you must have seen esophageal dilatation in acid poisoning patients. Is it the same that we use in achalasia, or there is something different?
Later we use a Rigiflex balloon catheter, sir, which is
so the thing is, you should be using a balloon catheter.
Yes.
Again, the cost, it's not very costly. It's around 2,000 rupees. You get a good balloon catheter. But again, as you said, or as sir said, for temporary means, by the time the patient goes for surgery, you may at times given, but again, the problem is of fibrosis.
But Vishnu, tell me, what are the complications of dilatation?
Overzealous dilatation may cause mucosal perforations in patients.
Through and through perforations, and that can have disastrous results, and that is about 2 to 4% depending on various series. What about recurrences after dilatation? Have you read about this? You said this is the treatment of choice. Oh, yeah, tell me then. Results.
How long does the effect last?
I have not read about endoscopic dilation much.
Okay, so if you really had to go in for a gold medal, I would expect you to say there is a paper by Bookstein in New England Journal of Medicine, which say that nowadays dilatation must be graded dilatation. You don't do a full dilatation at one time. They in fact accept that patient should have 2.4 is the average. So between 2 and 3 dilatations are required before the patient has full relief of dysphagia. And the recurrence rates are between 20 and 40% and a 2 to 4% chance of perforation. It is, as sir said, it is done with a Rigiflex balloon under CARM control, under sedation as a day procedure. Carry on.
There are novel experimental approach for the treatment of achalasia, which was introduced in 2009 by the Japanese surgeons. Submucosal endoscopic esophageal myotomy, which is also termed as POEM, peroral endoscopic myotomy, is showing a better treatment modalities apart from the other treatment modalities.
Tell me more about POEM, Vishnu.
POEM, sir, there is a submucosal tunnel is created after 15 centimeters along the length of the esophagus, and then myotomy of the only circular muscle fibers is done, and then after injecting a methylene blue dye, we pass the catheters. We got the endoscopic catheter inside the submucosal tunnel which we have created.
No, they are not catheters. They use. They are forceps like the one we use in surgery. They, what you call it? They split. Once you are injecting the dye, you get the exact submucosal plane. You find the muscle. You split the muscle. Use cautery also. They have got special cautery instruments also. And if it bleeds, you can clip it also.
Very good. So the originator, Vishnu, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the originator is a Japanese surgeon called Dr. Inui. And he, as you said, you go in at 15 centimeters. It's not only methylene blue. They usually dilute methylene blue with gelfusin or with normal saline, create the submucous tunnel. And as sir said, use a diamond tip knife to divide the muscle under vision. You go right down, including doing a gastric myotomy, and then you reclose the mucosa using clips. So tell me the advantage and disadvantages of POEM.
Advantage is short hospital stay, and patient wouldn't have to undergo a major procedure like open Heller's cardiomyotomy, or even considerably laparoscopy is also when compared to endoscopic perforation myotomies.
So do you think it is less invasive compared to laparoscopy because you make a tunnel submucosally, you divide the myotomy? Is it less invasive than laparoscopy? And the stay, if you see the papers, show a marginally higher stay with POEM. Nobody goes home in less than 2.5 or 3 days. What are the problems with POEM? What is the efficacy and the problems, both things, after POEM?
What is the thing in endoscopy which we do not do when we do laparoscopy? We always do, which is not possible with endoscopy.
Sir, anti-reflex procedure is not possible by doing POEM procedures.
Anything else?
What about relief of dysphagia? POEM versus Heller's.
Heller's has higher it has 90% remission of dysphagia when compared to POEM.
That is also not true. You have to do what is called a Vissich score to measure dysphagia, and the dysphagia relief between POEM and Heller's is approximately the same. The problem after POEM is a very high incidence of acid reflux, which ranges from different series between 18% and 40%. Because as Sir said, you don't do anti-reflux procedure. If you see the old data on Heller's when it was being done transthoracically, the patients had almost 30% patients would be on long-term PPIs for volume reflux. And these are often PPI non-responsive. So the same problem is there with the POEM. It dysphagia-wise as effective, but because you don't combine this with the fundoplication, you will have significant reflux. Carry on.
Vishnu, I have forgotten the name, but if you know, you should remember those 2-3 names of the instruments used for POEM purposes. Olympus and other companies, they have it, and you should know the names.
Right. Carry on, Vishnu.
Coming to surgical management of achalasia cardia, sir. The goal of the surgery is to alleviate the distal esophageal obstruction by division of the circular muscle fibers comprising the lower esophageal sphincter. Myotomy can be accomplished via laparotomy, thoracotomy, and laparoscopy. Coming to history of Heller's myotomy, sir. First described by Ernst Haller in 1913, where he used an abdominal approach to perform an anterior and posterior esophagomyotomy. His original description involved performing both an anterior and posterior myotomy. This has evolved in most centers to performing an anterior myotomy. And sir, esophageal myotomy for achalasia is associated with good long-term results and relief from dysphagia. Long-term follow-up studies have demonstrated symptom relief in nearly 75% of patients at 20 years old. Short-term follow-up studies demonstrate that nearly 90% of patients are symptom-free approximately 3 years post-procedure. So prior hesitancy for referring patients for Heller myotomy in the olden days was partially due to the invasive nature of the procedure, and which in the past was performed via laparotomy or thoracotomy, as well as a long hospital stay and long recovery. So coming to laparoscopic Heller's myotomy, sir. The first laparoscopic Heller's myotomy was performed by Sir Alfred Cuschieri in 1991, and it was with the arrival of minimally invasive techniques in this field, which was heralded by the reports of Shimi et al. Describing the laparoscopy approach in 1991. Pellegrini described the thoracoscopic approach in 1992, and laparoscopic cardiomyotomy plus partial fundoplication is the standard treatment for achalasia nowadays. So coming to patient preparation pre and peroperatively, on the night before the surgery, sir, a 14-gauge Ryle's tube is inserted and a wash is given with normal saline until the retaining fluid is clear, so as to prevent any aspiration while intubating the patient. Patients are instructed to remain on a liquid diet for 2 days prior to surgery to minimize the amount of retained food within the esophagus and decrease the risk of aspiration at the time of surgery. Coming to anesthetic modality, usually a rapid sequence intubation is performed by the anesthesiologist to minimize the risk of aspiration, especially in patients with dilated esophagus. In the presence of a sigmoid esophagus or a megaesophagus, a nasogastric tube is placed to facilitate emptying of esophageal contents. So coming to patient position and team position and port placement, the patient is positioned in a modified Lloyd Davis position, sir, with legs split open and the operating surgeon standing in between, sir. Yes, sir.
Please carry on.
The operating surgeon standing in between the split open legs, and the first assistant and the second assistant standing on the left and the right of the patient, and the scrub nurse on the right of the surgeon. So in port placements, optical trocar is placed approximately 4 to 5 centimeters above the umbilicus, which usually a 10 mm port with 30-degree cameroscopy is used. The working ports are placed on the either sides of the camera port, which are in the mid-clavicular length on the either sides of the costal margins. And a 5 mm trocar is placed in the epigastrium 2 centimeters below the ciphisternum, right of the midline, which is usually used to retract the liver while dissection. And sir, another port is placed in the anterior axillary line, in the line of the optical trocar, which is used to mobilize the, which is used to support the myotomized esophagus, and while dissecting the short gastric vessels and mobilization of the gastric fundus. So in operative techniques, two approaches for the approaches in the esophagus in laparoscopic Heller's cardiomyotomy have been discussed: the left crus approach and the gastrohepatic or the pars flaccida approach. The left crus approach employs dissection of the phrenicogastric ligament and short gastric vessel dilation, followed by dissection of the esophagus anteriorly, laterally, and medially from the left crus. Minimal posterior dissection is done so as to prevent esophageal injury and pleural injury. So the gastrohepatic ligament approach employs dissection of pars flaccida, an avascular segment of the gastrohepatic ligament, to approach the right crus of the diaphragm. So here we are seeing the pars flaccida, and the pars flaccida has been cut open with a harmonic scalpel or electronic shears or thunderbeat electrocautery. Pars flaccida of the gastrohepatic ligament is divided to dissect the esophagus from the right to approach the right crus of the diaphragm, where the peritoneum of the right crus of the diaphragm anteriorly is kept as it is, and the phrenicoesophageal ligaments are dissected to mobilize the esophagus further proximally into the chest.
Which two structures can you find in the pars flaccida, which you must take care of?
Sir, there can be an aberrant left hepatic artery which may arise from the celiac trunk, sir.
Very good. While, what else?
Sir, there can be aberrant cystic duct or cystic artery which may be present in the gastrohepatic.
Artery won't come here, no? The second thing you find is the hepatic branch of the vagus. And that comes where the inferior border of the caudate lobe is, and that must be preserved because denervation of the hepatic branch of the vagus causes gallstones in the long term. So that is seen in all patients. Unusually, as you said, you may see a anomalous left hepatic coming off the celiac. Very good. Carry on.
Sir, the pars flaccida of the gastrohepatic ligament is divided to reach the right crus of the diaphragm, where anterior peritoneum of the diaphragm is left and the crus of the diaphragm is dissected away from the esophagus anteriorly and laterally and medially to mobilize the esophagus. The esophagus is then bluntly dissected away from the right crus anterolaterally. An Alice clamp provides gentle downward traction on the GE junction to access the esophagus superiorly. Followed by this, we go to the greater curvature of the stomach to divide the short gastric vessels on the greater curvature. So care should be taken while dividing the short gastric vessels. An overzealous dissection may cause an unseen thermal injury, which may later present in the postoperative period as a perforation or a leak. Sir.
Why do you divide the short gastrics, Vishnu?
Sir, for mobilization of the, if there is, so to mobilize the fundus for a proper wrap, to provide a tension-free wrap. It is said that
we'll do an anterior wrap, no, for which you don't mobilize the short gastrics. Short gastrics are divided if you plan to do a 2-phase posterior 270 wrap. If you plan to do, we'll come to that. You carry on.
The left crus is identified, and then anterior mediastinal dissection of the esophagus is performed. Sir. This is not necessary to significantly dissect the posterior attachments of the esophagus, because we are not because adequate mobilization of the esophagus into the abdominal cavity is necessary, and overzealous dissection may cause perforation or posterior pleural injury. An adequate
if you don't do posterior dissection, how are you going to do a 2-phase wrap? You said you divide short gastric because you want to do 2-phase. Unless you mobilize the esophagus posteriorly, the fundus will not come this side, no? So if you want to do 2-phase, you must do posterior dissection. If you want to do DOR, you don't divide short gastrics and don't do posterior dissection. Good, carry on.
An adequate intra-abdominal length of esophagus is necessary to perform a good fundoplication. So the main goal is to gain as much length as possible anteriorly to later perform the myotomy. Sir, it is important to identify the and identify and preserve the anterior vagus nerve. This nerve and gastroesophageal junction fat pad are carefully dissected away from the esophageal body and preserved so that a continuous myotomy can be performed. Usually,
what is this fat pad called, Vishnu? It's called the Belsey's fat pad. You know, remember the Mark Belsey Mark IV operations for hiatus hernia? Named after that surgeon, it's called the Belsey's fat pad. Carry on, you're doing a good job.
Sir, starting below on the stomach and extending above the vagus as it crosses from left to right on the anterior aspect of the gastroesophageal junction. Sir, the anterior vagus is gently dissected away from the esophagus, and a window is created while the vagus is crossing from left to right, sir, so as to extend the cardiomyotomy upwards. The gastroesophageal fat pad to the left of the anterior vagus now is dissected. This allows for accurate identification of the gastroesophageal junction at the time of myotomy. Sir, usually a 50 French, at this time, a 50 French lighted bougie is passed into the esophagus and stomach, sir. Transillumination provides aid in identification of the submucosal plane. Sir, usually a L-shaped retractor or a laparoscopic backplug is first applied partially opened over the bougie and generally dragged over the tissue and around the bougie to provide tension and exposure. The vagus now is gently held with a Babcock forceps and dissected anterior-laterally for adequate exposure of the anterior wall of esophagus. Blunt dissection is always preferred to minimize the injury to the anterior vagus. A window is, in this image, a window is being created in the lateral aspect of the anterior vagus now, so as to create a plane to extend the anterior myotomy upwards. The esophageal fat pad of the esophagus in the abdomen is excised to identify the angle of His. It separates the esophagus from the stomach. This provides adequate exposure to the anterior wall of the stomach that is subjected for the cardiomyotomy. The submucosa of the stomach contains a rich plexus of vessels that can be used as a visual identifier. Sir, after locating the plane, we go cranially upwards, and then after reaching a myotomy length of approximately 6 to 8 centimeters, then we come down and do the cardiomyotomy, where the sling fibers are identified and cut. Submucosal bleeding should be tackled with gentle pressure by applying a gentle pressure with a gauze pad, and cauterization should never be used, as this is the most common site of perforation while doing cautery over the bleeding points on the gastroesophageal junction submucosa. Sir, typically one can get 6 to 8 centimeters above the gastroesophageal junction and 2 to 3 centimeters below it. Sir, first we divide the outer longitudinal fibers and then the inner circular layer. Gentle teasing using an L retractor is to be done, and minimal application of cautery is to be preferred. The myotomy is carefully extended and taken above the level of the anterior vagus now, as it crosses from left to right over the esophagus. The extent of the myotomy is to take it as proximally as possible. Like I discussed, bleeding from submucosal vessels that are mistaken from muscle fibers occasionally occurs but is self-limited. Gentle pressure is usually adequate to control and stop it, and the surgeon must be very cautious in applying electrocautery, as an unrecognized injury may result, leading to delayed perforation, and thus should be avoided. Sir, in fundoplication, sir, posterior partial fundoplication is done. Toupee 270 degrees partial posterior fundoplication is performed for the anterior flex procedure as a final part of the operation. Sir, the fundus is mobilized and a Shushan wrap is done so as to ensure that there is no posterior adhesions of the stomach and there is no fundus wrinkling behind the esophagus. A suture is placed on the posterior portion of the fundus, 3 centimeters below the gastroesophageal junction and 2 centimeters away from the line of the divided short gastric vessels. This is used as a reference point to ensure a symmetric posterior wrap. The fundus is brought posteriorly behind the gastroesophageal junction, and the reference suture is grasped and brought up to the edge of the myotomy. Fundus is sutured to the right crus to achieve tension, to elevate tension using 2-0 silk suture. The edge of the wrap is then sutured to the myotomy's edge with 3 sutures in similar fashion. The left component of the wrap is sutured to the edge of the myotomy and to the left crus to stabilize the wrap to prevent any postoperative slippage or migration of the wrap in later stages of the postoperative stages. In similar fashion, after completing the wrap, the ports and liver retractors are removed, abdomen is decompressed, and port sides are sutured. Sir, the debate between Toupee and door fundoplication in Heller's cardiomyopathy.
What do you do with the bougie? You have already kept you had a bougie inside, right?
The bougie is to identify any mucosal perforations which shows as a illumination coming from the mucosal side, and there can be saliva also coming from the mucosal side, sir. The bougie can be removed after doing a fundoplication.
Vishnu, you finished your operative steps?
Yes, sir.
Vishnu, you finished?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, now several questions. First is, have you seen a live lap Hellas done?
Yes, sir. I have seen, sir.
But I don't think anyone in the world is using bougies now. Bougies are mainly used for anti-reflux surgery and fundoplication, not for achalasia. The second you would add to your preoperative workup is the use of antifungals if the patient has a fungal esophagitis. The third thing I would suggest to you is you need to tell us the data between anterior door and posterior toupees. Do you know that? Vishnu, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, tell me. What is the data between anterior and posterior? Don't tell me a slide. Tell me the evidence.
Sir, recent evidences show that there is no significant data between it. There is no significant improvement or any deployments between performing an anterior or a posterior fundoplication, sir. The results
that is not true. In fact, in 2018, there is a prospective data from surgical endoscopy, which is probably the only paper that shows that toupees has a better long-term anti-reflux effect as compared to DOR. The advantage of the DOR, however, is it acts as a serosal patch to cover your myotomy. So in case there is a small microperforation also, it covers it. The third point is you will always do an intraop endoscopy if possible for two reasons. One is to confirm that the myotomy is complete. And second is to see any microperforation, because you keep saline into that area and you insufflate and distend the esophagus with air. You will see bubbling in case there is a microperforation, and then you can close that and put a wrap on top of that. So bougies are a no-no, always intraop endoscopy, and the choice is of the surgeon between DOR and toupees, but there is a RCT in surgical endoscopy showing toupees is better. Good. Carry on.
DOR fundoplication acceptable and is technically easier to perform than the toupee and requires less dissection, especially of the posterior stomach. Some authors recommend DOR fundoplication if there is a suspected mucosal injury, as it acts as a wrap over the mucosal injuries. The wrap will seal the mucosal injury and prevent any leak post-operatively. In coming to intraoperative complications, if mucosal perforation occurs during the dissection, it is usually evident as saliva or gastric secretions or the light from the bougie is seen. Sir, vagus nerve injury is a feared but neglected complication of the anti-reflux surgery. A higher prevalence of diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting was observed in the patients with accidental vagus nerve injury. Sir, and bleeding from the site of myotomy.
Intraoperative there for a minute. I'll stop you for a minute. See, there are some people, actually you don't see saliva coming out because the esophagus is empty. Tell me how you identify technically that you have come on the stomach. How long a myotomy do you want, ideally?
6 to 8 centimeters on the esophagus and 2 to 3 centimeters on the gastroesophagus.
No. I suggest you read a consensus statement of the ISDE, the International Society for Diseases of Esophagus. They had what is called the Las Vegas Consensus, and they said that the length of the myotomy depends on what type of achalasia it is. It is now mandated to do manometry pre-op, type 1, type 2, type 3. If it's a type 3 achalasia, then you need to have a 7 centimeters on esophagus and 3 on the stomach. So length should be 10 centimeters in all. Type 1 and type 2, you can do 6 plus 2. But remember, the failure of myotomy is because of inadequate gastric myotomy. The esophageal myotomy never causes a problem. You tell me technically, if you have seen how did the surgeon identify that he's come on the stomach? What are the ways of identifying that you are crossed OG junction coming from above down? Do you know?
Esophageal fat pad and the veins of the stomach, sir. The short the veins.
Excellent. So this is really a question that you should ask in a surgical gastroenterology viva. Not fair to ask you for MS general surgery, but I'm very happy you answered that, because when you come to the stomach, you start seeing submucous vessels. That's point 1. And point 2 is you start seeing oblique fibers on the stomach side. On the esophagus side, you have only the outer longitudinal, inner circular. The minute you come onto the stomach, you see the oblique fibers also coming. That is the way of measuring. And what you should do is actually put in a tape inside the abdomen to confirm that you have a 10 centimeter long myotomy. Very good, Vishnu. The second point is this vagus nerve. I would be a little careful of making such a statement because, you know, in the 60s and 50s, when they were doing hiatus hernia repairs transthoracic, there is a paper from the same author you mentioned, Pellegrini. He had published in the Annals of Surgery to divide the vagus to cause esophageal lengthening. I can personally tell you I have accidentally injured vagus at least 5 times in hiatal surgery in the last 20 years. And if you divide one vagus, nothing happens. So you don't make us, I agree, we must preserve the vagus because this is a functional surgery, but one division of vagus doesn't do anything to the gastric motility. Carry on.
Just a second. Pankaj bhai, Vinit sir. Sir, I have to go. Actually, I was in the process of an NCI inspection. I'll be back in 5 minutes. I have to check my email. Dr. Partner, just give me leave for 5 minutes.
Sure, sir. Sure.
Can you continue?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, intraoperative endoscopy can be used to confirm the injury as well as evaluate it after it has been repaired. Mucosal injury should be repaired with 40 observable sutures and consideration given to perform an anterior buttressing fundoplication. If all muscle fibers have been correctly divided, an open GE junction will be clearly visible on endoscopy without indentations from undivided fibers. In addition, gentle insufflation injury to the mucosa can be seen both endoscopically and laparoscopically. Sir, in post-operative care, upon completion of the operation, the nasogastric tube is removed before extubation. On post-operative day 1, the patient receives a diet, a soft diet preferably. A barium swallow is seldom ordered before resuming a diet unless a perforation is suspected, where a gastrografin study can be used to rule out any perforations. The patients are instructed to keep a soft mechanical diet until the first clinical appointment, when they are instructed to start an unrestricted diet. So, in post-operative complications include post-operative leak due to mucosal perforation, persistent dysphagia due to inadequate myotomy, post-operative recurrence of gastroesophageal reflux, and slippage of the fundic wrap and wrap migration. Sir, in myotomy outcomes...
Stop for a minute.
Yes, sir.
Slippage of fundic wrap is a problem seen only with toupets, not with DOR. And wrap migration is again only with toupets, not with DOR. Tell me one thing. You mentioned barium swallow if you suspect a perforation. In fact, if you are worried about perforation, you will always use gastrografin,
yes,
never barium, because barium will come into the mediastinum. You are in very deep trouble. So the barium should never be done after achalasia. If you have a doubt, then either you do oral contrast CT or do a gastrografin study. Go on.
Coming to outcomes of the myotomy, sir. After laparoscopic esophagomyotomy, symptomatic improvement has been reported in 89% of patients, independent of whether a fundoplication was performed concurrently. It has also been suggested that the clinical outcome is dependent on the stage of the disease before the surgery, with stage 4 disease patients responding only 50% of the time compared with 90% for stage 1 to 3 patients. Studies have reported that 92% of patients with poor outcomes resulted from complications of severe reflux disease and not from incomplete myotomy itself. So this is a study of Heller's myotomy, laparoscopic Heller's myotomy, and with and without anti-reflux procedures. In Richards et al. In 2004 by Annals of the Surgery, there have been 21 patients who have been operated only by Heller's and 22 patients who have been operated by Heller's and DORS fundoplication. So acid reflux has been reported in 47.6%, and comparatively only 9.1% of patients had a persistent acid reflux in patients operated with Heller's laparoscopic Heller's and DORS fundoplication. In a study by Rice et al., there has been 61 patients have been operated by Heller's cardiomyotomy, and 88 patients who have underwent laparoscopic Heller's with the DORS fundoplication. The exposure time, number of episodes and longest episode of time of acid reflux has been decreased in DORS, whereas it did not impair any esophageal emptying in the Heller's and DORS fundoplication. So effects of prior endoscopic treatments on myotomy outcomes. Preoperative endoscopic therapies have been associated with greater likelihood for persistent or recurrent severe symptoms and need for additional treatments. Prior esophageal surgery for achalasia has also been associated with poorer functional results after laparoscopic esophagomyotomy. Surgery after botulinum toxin injections has been suggested to be more difficult because of marked fibrotic reactions. So treatment options after failed myotomy. Patients in whom myotomy has failed can be effectively treated with botulinum toxin. Up to 71% of such patients can have symptom resolution at 1 year post-injection. Repeat myotomy may be superior to endoscopic treatment and should be undertaken by experienced surgeons. Esophagectomy should be considered in appropriately selected patients after myotomy failure. Endoscopic balloon dilatation after myotomy is currently considered hazardous by most experts and should be avoided.
Stop for a minute. How, if a patient comes to you with dysphagia after a failed myotomy, how will you evaluate this patient to find out the cause of the failure?
Esophageal pressure topography with high resolution manometry, and we can do an impedance testing also for the patient to see if there is any esophageal reflex causing heartburn and dysphagia.
So what will you expect to find? You said high resolution manometry and tomography. What do you expect to find? How will it change your treatment? Again, this is a surgical gastroenterology question. You are done very well, which is why I'm asking you this question. So what you must do is two things. If you do a barium swallow, it doesn't help you because the dilatation of the esophagus doesn't go away for some years. What you should do is to do a high resolution manometry, not impedance, because pH is not a problem. Your high resolution manometry should show you what the LES pressures are. If the LES pressures are more than 12, it means it's an inadequate myotomy. And those are patients who will benefit from dilatation, Botox or redo surgery or POEM. If the LES pressures are below 10, which is what you expect after a myotomy, and the patient has dysphagia, this dysphagia is because of aperistaltic body of the esophagus and nothing can be done for him except giving PPIs. So this is a way of sub-classifying these patients who get dysphagia after myotomy. Do a manometry and then take it from there. The second is there is enough data that if you can, I don't agree with your last statement that I think endoscopic balloon dilatation after the previous achilles surgery is safe and should be the first line of treatment a surgeon should do if your LES pressures are high. The second statement, repeat myotomy. I think when Ankur Patel was in our unit, we have published our own data of 18 patients in Journal of Royal College, where you show that you can do a redo surgery. And this is a prospective data that we have published. The third is esophagectomy is absolutely the last resort. Most patients you can do POEM or some palliative treatment, and Botox is a very short-term treatment. So Botox should not be done after a failure. The first thing should be a dilatation. If that doesn't work, then you have a choice of either doing POEM or redo myotomy. Go on.
Advantages of laparoscopy over other modalities. So laparoscopic myotomy can be performed safely and with minimal morbidity selected patients. In the hands of appropriately trained surgeons, it leads to dysphagia control and improved quality of life in most patients. It is less cumbersome with short hospital stay with faster and effective recovery. Less recurrence rates with long-term symptomatic relief in most patients.
Why not do thoracoscopic, Vishnu? You can do the same myotomy.
Yes, sir. In thoracotomy, sir, in thoracotomy and thoracoscopy, we can't do an anti-reflex procedure, sir.
Absolutely right. So they get a lot of reflux post-op. Good. Carry on.
Importance of anti-reflex procedures. Several authors have suggested that fundoplication is not necessary as it does not confer a significant benefit and may increase the risk for dysphagia. Like there can be a tight wrapping of the fundus along over the myotomy, which itself can cause dysphagia and increase gastroesophageal reflux. Others have argued that it is beneficial as it helps in decreasing the incidence of post-operative gastroesophageal reflux. 30% of patients complained of significant heartburn, with a 24-hour pH probe or endoscopy demonstrating that 60% of patients had significant gastroesophageal reflux. Objective analysis reveals an unacceptable rate of gastroesophageal reflux in laparoscopic Ehlers myotomy without an anti-reflex procedure. So therefore, performing a concurrent anti-reflex procedure is recommended.
You finished? Vishnu, you finished?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Now, tell me what you did an excellent presentation covering things very well, and I would certainly give you 70% if I were your examiner. I'm sure Dr. Modi will be even more generous, seeing that you are his PG student. What happens if the patient has a sigmoid esophagus?
After evaluating the patient for sigmoid esophagus, sir, either we can go for, like you suggested, sir, POEM, or if patient is a moribund patient, then we can go for pharmacotherapy or botulinum toxin injections, or we can do graded dilatation of the esophagus. If patient is a young patient, we can plan for esophagomyectomy, sir, esophagectomy.
I think you covered all the options. I think the one thing you cannot do a POEM in sigmoid esophagus. It's a contraindication to POEM because when the longitudinal axis of the esophagus becomes horizontal, it can't be done. So I think the treatment of choice is basically to do a myotomy, telling the patient that over the long term, he may develop recurrences and may need esophagectomy. But esophagectomy is a very morbid procedure for a benign condition like achalasia. So it should be only offered to people who fail surgery. I would also like you to read a paper published from GB Pant Hospital by Dr. Agarwal. He's the HOD of surgery. I think since you're doing achalasia, read that paper. This is published last year, and he's described an interesting operation to do a side-to-side esophago-gastroanastomosis. His concept is you dilate the hiatus, and the esophagus is horizontal in the sigmoid esophagus. You put one, you fire a cartridge, a stapler between the fundus and the sigmoid esophagus, creating a side-to-side anastomosis. But the problem to this is very high incidence of reflux because you don't have a GE junction. Okay, Vishnu, another question from my side is some patients get what is called an epiphrenic diverticulum. Have you heard of this or read about this as part of achalasia? What is it?
I didn't read about epiphrenic diverticulum.
You did. Now, epiphrenic diverticula are, see, diverticula of the esophagus are traction and pulsion. Traction diverticula are those because of inflammatory pathology in the mediastinum of the lung that pulls the esophagus. On the other hand, the pulsion diverticulum is because of distal obstruction. So in a long-standing achalasia, you tend to get a pseudo diverticulum called an epiphrenic diverticulum. Usually comes 3 to 4 centimeters above the OG junction, and patients get a lot of regurgitation. Apart from dysphagia because of achalasia, because of food, when they lie down at night, the food in the diverticulum tends to regurge back and give aspiration pneumonia. So the treatment of this is doing a transhiatal diverticulectomy as well as doing a myotomy. You never do a diverticulectomy alone because there is a distal functional obstruction. So if you don't do a myotomy, there will be a leak. So you must do a diverticulectomy, you must do a myotomy, and then do a DOR wrap. But I think you've covered everything extremely well. Compliments to you. I think Dr. Modi has obviously trained you very well in this unit. Modi sir, और कुछ पूछना है आपको sir?
Hello.
Dr. Modi, Apuru, yes.
Hello, sir, Vineet here.
Yes, Vineet.
I just wanted to ask you, sir, is there any like it's surgeon's choice whether to do a toupee or whether to do DOR, but clinically or intraoperatively, can we like, is there any some practical points like we should go for a toupee in one in a patient or a DOR in another patient, like any practical point? Which
actually, no, there is only a single paper in surgical endoscopy that shows marginally better anti-reflux control with toupees as compared to DOR. Otherwise, the data is divided. In my hands, I will do a DOR for every patient. I never do a toupees because to me, the concept of the DOR is two. One is to prevent reflux and it covers my myotomy. I also always will insist on doing an intraop endoscopy to rule out leak because our protocol is to remove the nasogastric tube on table, feed them in 4 hours and discharge them in 24 hours. We don't do contrast studies. We don't do anything like that. So in our center, we do at least 2 achalasias a month and they all get DOR. But there are groups like the GEM group or Dr. Palnivel who does only toupees. So I don't think we have enough evidence to do one against the other.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Apurva,
yeah, sir. Sorry, I had to go because actually I had an assessment of an examination.
Right,
and
yes, sir.
So
I think he's presented very well. I think very well.
Your finer points, I think you must have covered all the fine points. Anything you need to tell? No, sir. You have a good experience about these particular surgeries. So,
Nice.
Ankur, anything for the sir?
Hello. Hello.
Have any, sir?
I would like to ask for Vishnu that suppose you are creating a posterior window. So what clinically, what we have to see practically, like that it's a big posterior window. What things do we have to see that yes, we have made an adequate posterior window? Vishnu.
Yes, sir. Both the crush should be the V of the crush should be seen, sir, so that we can find out that the adequate posterior window has been done. Both the right and left crust, the junction of the right and left crust has to be seen so that we can find out that an adequate window has been done posteriorly.
Yes, sir. Yes, very good. And proper mobilization of the short gastrics, that is also very important. And then once we wrap it, the wrap should not go back. That is another practical point. It should not go back. It should stay there. And you should always do the shoe shine maneuver. So that way now you come to know that yes, the posterior window is adequate enough, and that's how we have to see for the posterior window.
Yeah, excellent point Dr. Vineet has made. I think you do not only do a shoe shine, but after you finish shoe shine, you leave the stomach. It should not get pulled back to the opposite side, because otherwise it means that there is something pulling the stomach to the other side, and it will cause a rotational torque of the esophagus if you do that. See, one of the causes of dysphagia after Heller's is also improperly done wrap. I have had 2 patients who have come to me where we had to just dismantle the wrap and convert the toothpaste to a door, because there's a rotational torque because of inadequate mobilization of the fundus stomach. So the manometry is crucial. If the LES pressures are normal, it's a different. If it's higher, then my first choice is balloon dilatation, then redo surgery, then POEM, in that order. Pankaj bhai, any points to add? Is Pankaj bhai online?
Yeah, he is there.
Yes, I'm just listening, mesmerized.
I
do practically open, so I did not want to butt in. But what I want to say is, yes, it's right. The laparoscopic surgeon should be more careful while performing the wrap, because there is when you do open surgery like us, we have a manual filling also that, and we can do it. But the most important, what I have observed, even we do in open, is that once you do shoe shine, leave the stomach and it should remain there and remain easily. And sometimes it is better to do a less Heller rather than more. That is another point, whether it is a open or laparoscopy. But yes, sir, that is a very important. And the mobilization of short gastric is very important, because that is when we are talking of open surgery, it is little difficult to ligate and secure the short gastric pressure. So it is a tendency not to ligate minimum 2 short gastric. So if you have not done a ligation of short gastric and mobilization of peritoneal fold from fundus to spleen, the fundus will not come out easily on opposite side. And if it all come out, the fulcrum will remain with the spleen, and it will, what you have said, form the chances of postoperative dysphagia is increased.
I think the other interesting thing is to always try and do intraop endoscopy. My own feeling is that every general surgeon, laparoscopic surgeon must do endoscopies, at least diagnostic. If you do an intraop endoscopy, you're sure that the myotomy is complete and there is no perforation. So you can feed the patient very calm. We don't put drains, we don't do dye studies, because you know intraop that there is no leak. So I think that is another important part of this procedure, to do intraop endoscopy. No bougies, only endoscopy.
Yes, sir. Most of the surgeons, what I have seen, they do intraoperative endoscopy. They'll switch off all the lights, and that is a very good thing to do, and it helps a lot. I think whether I was a little bit away for a time being. Sir, if at all in laparoscopy perforation occurs, many surgeons I have seen, they try to cover the perforation with extended Toupet procedure or converting into
sir, I already said.
I think I was not there. Yes.
There are 2 tips I want to give you. I have seen some people actually putting methylene blue through the Ryle's tube. That is something that you mustn't do, because once it stains the mucosa, you're not able to see from inside later. What you must do is, if on endoscopy you see a perforation, just take a 3-0 vicryl and take a simple suture over that. And rather than doing toothpaste, do a door. It's like a serosal patch covering that.
Yes, sir. Yes.
If there is a perforation, we keep the patient NBM 48 hours and then do a gastrographin study to confirm there's no leak.
Do you put drain then?
In that case, I would put a drain, sir.
Yes, sir. Because
in fact, the only perforation I've had in my life is in Ahmedabad, when I was doing a live surgery in one of the Kaizen workshops. I've never in my life otherwise had a perforation.
I will tell you, last week I was doing one open. achalasia. It was a very bad case, previously operated 2-3 times, and I had a perforation. But yes, we sutured with the 3-0 vital, put a drain, patient was all right. After 2-3 days, we could start orally. It's okay. I think you must have discussed also rice tube, rule of rice tube.
Yes, sir.
I think that's all. I think that I cannot add into none. Apurva, would you like to ask anything? Yes.
I think well done. Ankur, કઈ પૂછવા જેવું તમને લાગે છે?
No, sir.
So,
No, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Patankar. I'm really sorry because I was busy. I could not give you a heads up early on.
No problem, sir. My pleasure to be with all of you. मोदी सर बोलते हैं हम नहीं आए, ऐसा हो ही नहीं सकता है.
Thank you very much, sir. My residents are really obliged because we are doing, actually it is a part of our only departmental activity, but we are taking advantage of Zoom because we have purchased Zoom for a 1 month monthly. So we anyway doing a master class, so we are using this and taking advantage of a senior people like you. Thank you very much for joining.
Excellent activity. Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure to be there. Please
Thank
call
you,
me
sir.
anytime.
We'll
I'm happy to participate.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, Ankur. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.